Beneath the official histories, in the locked drawers and burned ledgers, there are fragments of another war, one fought in corridors of silence, where truth was a liability and knowledge a weapon. The names are erased, the witnesses buried, yet the shadows they left still breathe in forgotten vaults and sealed tunnels. Step too close, and you'll feel it. The cold hand of something meant to remain unseen, waiting for the curious to come looking. The last week of April 1945 was one of collapse and chaos in central Germany. The US 97th Infantry Division had pushed into Thuringia, encountering only scattered Wehrmacht resistance. On April 28th, a small reconnaissance element from Company F, 386th Infantry Regiment was ordered to investigate an unmarked rail spur outside the village of Grossbreitenbach. The track ended abruptly at a bricked-over tunnel mouth, its masonry reinforced with fresh concrete, and the insignia of the Ahnenerbe, the SS's research and occult bureau, painted in fading black across the ceiling wall. Lieutenant Samuel Corbett, the patrol leader, noted in his field diary that his men heard a humming, low-frequency noise emanating from behind the wall. Combat engineers were brought forward, and by late afternoon, the barrier had been breached. Inside lay a vast underground freight tunnel, the air heavy with ozone and machine oil. Lining both sides were wooden crates stenciled Nur for Ahnenerbe, each roughly the size of a field radio set. At the far end of the tunnel, partially obscured by canvas tarps, stood a massive cylindrical device mounted on a railcar chassis, its surface covered in copper coils and steel ribs. Corbett reported to battalion command, but within hours, the operations control shifted abruptly to a detachment of Military Intelligence Service, MIS officers arriving in unmarked jeeps. The MIS team ordered all non-essential personnel to withdraw and imposed a blackout on the site. By midnight, the 97th Engineers were reassigned to other sectors, and the tunnel entrance was sealed again, this time under American guard. The surviving battalion log for April 29th contains a single heavily redacted entry. Per Schaff directive, relinquish site to tech section. No further observation authorized. No photographs from the initial discovery are known to exist, and the official after-action reports from Company F for that week were later misfiled into unrelated archives. In 1961, during the political thaw following the Prague Spring, a Czech archivist named Jan Vavra claimed to have recovered part of a burned manifest from a destroyed Wehrmacht depot outside Brno. The fragment listed materials shipped from SS Sonderlager Ohrdruf in February 1945, including Gerät 27, Schallfeldkanone Langwelle, Device 27, long-wave soundfield cannon. Alongside were notes indicating intended deployment against mechanized mass targets on the Oder front. Vavra smuggled the document to West Germany, but it was dismissed as an obvious forgery by both Allied and Soviet historians, though no substantive analysis was ever published. Decades later, in 1983, retired Sergeant Harold Baines, one of Corbett's squad members, was approached by a freelance journalist investigating US intelligence operations in occupied Germany. Baines, then living quietly in Ohio, agreed to meet but insisted on strict anonymity. According to the journalist's unpublished notes, Baines described being ordered to carry 2 crates out of the tunnel. They were unnaturally heavy for their size, and when he stumbled on uneven ballast, he swore he heard a resonating tone from inside the wood. He was told never to speak of it again. 2 weeks after his conversation with the journalist, Baines died suddenly of what local authorities called an undiagnosed cardiac event. No autopsy was performed at his family's request. Attempts to trace the chain of custody for the Thuringia tunnel contents run into blank files and sealed records. The US National Archives maintains a file labeled 97 ID April 45E MISC. Inside are only mundane ration forms and a torn map of Thuringia. Freedom of Information Act requests for Gerät 27-1 or related SHAFE correspondence are met with the standard no responsive documents reply. Survivors from the MIS detachment are almost non-existent. The few identified names belong to men who later served in the early formations of the CIA's Technical Services Division. One such officer, Robert H. Milburn, appeared briefly in declassified MK-Ultra budget memos in the 1950s, attached to projects involving neurological disruption through directed energy. A faint trail also appears in post-war German technical literature. In 1946, British intelligence interrogated Dr. Wilhelm Frickel, a former SS engineer specializing in acoustics. Frickel described an unfinished Schallfeldkanone, intended to project ultra-low frequency sound waves over a broad front, potentially causing disorientation, nausea, and even unconsciousness in enemy troops without conventional explosives. The weapon, he claimed, required a massive power source, something we had only in our special railcars. Frickel died in Soviet custody in 1948. If Jurat 27-1 was functional, its capture in April 1945 would represent one of the most significant and most suppressed technological recoveries of the war's end. Yet no trace of the device, its schematics, or its storage location has been confirmed. The only persistent anomaly is the absence of multiple April 1945 operational records for the 97th Infantry Division across both US Army and SHAF archives, records which, according to surviving unit rosters, should exist. The physical tunnel itself remains elusive. Aerial reconnaissance photographs from 1945 show the rail spur south of Grossbreitenbach, but modern maps reveal nothing. Only dense forest and faint ground scars consistent with backfilled earth. Local residents recall US troops in the area that spring, but no consensus on what they were guarding. One elderly villager interviewed in the 1990s recalled a strange vibration in the ground during those days, as though a giant machine was running deep below. Without physical evidence, the Thuringia frequency tunnel occupies an uncomfortable space between battlefield rumor and suppressed reality. What is certain is that in the last desperate days of the war, a small US infantry patrol stumbled upon something so unusual that its control was immediately wrested from frontline command and buried in a paperless chain of custody. Whatever lay on that rail car, be it incomplete prototype, mere propaganda artifact, or operational weapon, never saw public light again. Even now, military historians who attempt to piece together the incident find themselves staring at the same void. Names redacted, documents missing, coordinates scrubbed. The war left behind countless unexplored ruins, sealed bunkers, and lost convoys. But in Thuringia, the silence seems less like neglect and more like design. And as with so many operations from that closing chapter of the war, perhaps the only record that still matters is the one deliberately erased. On February 9th, 1947, the Baltic Sea lay under a sheet of winter ice, broken only by the dark swell of Soviet salvage trawlers working off the southern coast of Bornholm. Their target was the wreck of U-223 a German-type 9C-40 submarine scuttled in May 1945 under circumstances never fully explained. The vessel had been located months earlier by Danish fishermen whose nets repeatedly snagged on the jagged outline of a conning tower. Soviet Navy records indicate that the recovery operation was classified under the designation Project 4-17, reporting directly to the main directorate of the Navy in Moscow. Officially, the U-223 had been ferrying general cargo to Norway when she was sunk. The Kriegsmarine's own post-war loss listings are sparse, noting only cause unknown and location unconfirmed. But decrypts from the British Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Centre, OIC, dated May 2, 1945, tell a different story. These signals, preserved in the UK's National Archives, record frantic orders from the Admiralty to Coastal Command aircraft. Immediate interception priority. Deny recovery at all costs. Code Harbour Frost. The order coincides precisely with U-223's last known position. When the Soviets raised the wreck, divers reported an unusually intact pressure hull despite clear explosive scarring aft of the conning tower. Inside, The compartments were in remarkable condition. Aft crew quarters contained vacuum-sealed steel cylinders, each filled with a dense, silvery liquid, later identified as high-purity mercury. The cargo bay revealed an assortment of technical documents in German and Japanese, sealed in watertight cases and protected with waxed linen wrapping. Soviet salvage logs, later leaked to Polish intelligence, note a partially completed radio transmission recovered from the ship's wireless room. The final recorded phrase, abruptly cut off mid-transmission, read simply, Seelenspiegel. Western analysts attempting to translate the word settled on Soul Mirror, but no consensus emerged on its operational meaning. Japanese schematics found alongside the documents showed structural diagrams of an unidentifiable airframe with annotations in kanji and German technical shorthand. Marginal notes referenced J8M1 shusui and reflective interference skin, an apparent reference to radar countermeasures far beyond the known wartime technology of either Axis partner. The Soviets moved the entire cargo under guard to a restricted facility outside Sverdlovsk in the Urals. Soviet Navy communiques make no further mention of U-12-53 after March 1947, but multiple Western intelligence intercepts that year refer to unexplained mercury shortages across Eastern Bloc industrial channels. By April, the site of the recovery had been cleared of all debris, and the wreck was deliberately towed to deeper waters and scuttled beyond reach of commercial salvage. A Danish Coast Guard officer stationed at Nexo, interviewed decades later, recalled observing Soviet vessels working day and night for nearly a week in the frozen channel. He described strange metallic crates being winched from the water, each handled by sailors wearing protective aprons and gauntlets. His report to Copenhagen was filed but never acknowledged. Within a year, it had disappeared from local archives. Western military historians have struggled to reconcile the apparent urgency of the U-12-23 recovery with its low-profile handling in post-war literature. Some suggest the Mercury was intended for advanced detonators or fission initiators in German atomic research. Others argue it was a component in experimental propulsion systems. The Japanese connection, however, is harder to explain, especially given the distance between German U-boat operations in the Baltic and Japanese wartime research facilities. Declassified CIA memoranda from 1958, discovered in the late 1990s, contain brief references to Bornholm material in the context of early U-2 reconnaissance targets in the Soviet Union. One memo, heavily redacted, lists optical interference layers and skin resonance alongside HG containment units. Risk high if breached. The notes appear in the handwriting of James Angleton, then head of CIA counterintelligence. No known photographs of the U-12-53's interior survive. Soviet technical reports from 1947 remain sealed in Russian military archives, with release dates pushed indefinitely under the pretext of national security relevance. The location of the Seelenspiegel device, if such a device existed, is unknown. None of the Japanese engineers allegedly connected to the schematics survived the post-war purges and interrogations, and surviving Kriegsmarine officers, questioned by Allied teams, denied any knowledge of such a mission. In the absence of direct evidence, the U-12-23 Pulse salvage remains one of the murkiest intersections of late-war German technology transfer and post-war Soviet exploitation. Whether the Mercury cargo was tied to weapons research, propulsion experiments, or some hybrid technology shared between Axis powers, the fact remains that both Britain and the Soviet Union considered its recovery worth extraordinary measures. In the frozen Baltic of 1947, under a sunless sky, a single wreck gave up its secrets, and they vanished into a vault in Sverdlovsk, where they remain unseen to this day. On January 14, 1944, the Red Army launched the Vistula-Oder offensive, driving deep into central Poland. Wehrmacht supply lines disintegrated under the assault, and the German retreat quickly became a series of ad hoc demolitions designed to deny the Soviets anything of value. Among the most enigmatic incidents from this chaotic withdrawal occurred near Sandomierz, where local witnesses reported the destruction of Bridge 17, a double-track rail bridge spanning the Vistula, under the supervision of SS engineers. According to post-war Polish accounts, the detonation was unusual. Instead of merely dropping the bridge into the river, the charges were set to collapse a section of embankment, leading into a hillside tunnel on the west bank. Multiple residents recalled seeing an armored train, painted in dark camouflage and bearing the markings of Schwer Panzerzug 72X, vanish into that tunnel in the hours before the blast. Shortly after, SS trucks arrived, unloading wooden crates under guard. One witness claimed to see the crates stamped with the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, seal, and the label Abteilung 6 SAS, the Foreign Intelligence Branch of the Sicherheitsdienst, contemporary. Soviet operational logs from the First Ukrainian Front make no mention of an armored train in the sector, though they do note unexpected and deliberate demolition of railway infrastructure with possible sabotage objective. The tunnel was subsequently bypassed in the rapid Soviet advance, and by the time the area stabilized, the entrance had been sealed with tons of rubble. Nearly 3 decades later, in the summer of 1972, the Polish State Railways initiated seismic surveys to explore reopening the disused rail corridor. Engineers noted abnormal readings beneath the collapsed hillside, suggesting the presence of a large metallic object approximately 180 meters inside the blockage. The shape and density were consistent with a multi-car armored train. Within days, the Ministry of Transport received a special instruction from the Ministry of Internal Affairs to halt the survey. Officially, the reason given was unstable geology and risk to nearby structures, though no structures existed within several kilometers. Declassified CIA intelligence summaries from early 1973, obtained through the Polish immigré press, in Paris refer obliquely to rail asset Sandomierz sector and an object possibly containing documentation and hardware from Nachtgeist project. No further details on Project Nachtgeist have surfaced, but fragmentary German wartime memos intercepted by Bletchley Park in early 1945 refer to special optical acquisition devices under that codename. One decrypted message to SS Obergruppenführer Ernst Kaltenbrunner specifically instructs that the material be transported via armored train to a secure location west of the Oder. A retired Polish railway worker named Władysław Krupa, interviewed in 1991, recalled being part of a team sent to seal the tunnel in early 1945 under Soviet orders. Krupa claimed they were told to work only at night and that Soviet officers supervised every step. He also recounted hearing metallic clanging from deep inside the tunnel, though no one was permitted beyond the first 20 meters. His pay records from that winter list him as assigned to bridge reconstruction, but no reconstruction took place. Physical access to the site remains impossible. Modern aerial photography shows the faint depression of the old railway cutting, but the entrance area is overgrown and fenced, with Ministry of Defense warning signs in Polish and Russian. Requests to examine the site for historical purposes have been uniformly denied on security grounds, despite no active military installations nearby. Theories about the Vistula ghost train vary. Some historians suggest it carried looted art and gold from the general government. Others believe it was a mobile signals intelligence center, equipped to intercept and decode Allied traffic. The Nachtgeist connection, however, points toward an even more obscure possibility: that the train was transporting components for an advanced optical or radar-evading device, perhaps intended for late-war Luftwaffe aircraft or missile systems. If so, its concealment would have been a matter of high priority for the SS and later for the Soviets. Without excavation, confirmation is impossible. Yet the circumstantial evidence, eyewitness accounts, seismic data, and the unusual classification of railway survey results suggests that something extraordinary lies buried under the west bank of the Vistula. Like so many artifacts of the war's end, its exact nature is obscured by deliberate silence. What is clear is that an armored train entered the tunnel in January 1944 and never emerged, its contents sealed in darkness by both German demolitions and subsequent Soviet secrecy. The iron beneath Sandomierz remains undisturbed, and perhaps by design will remain so. In late March 1953, a US Army intelligence team operating under the 441st Counterintelligence Corps was dispatched to Mindoro, Philippines, following intercepted radio traffic from a former Imperial Japanese Army engineer. The transmissions, logged by Navy SIGINT Station Sangley Point, referenced an unrecorded coastal installation, a secondary fortress that had never appeared on Allied wartime charts. The site, located deep within the jungle foothills near Bulalakaw, was accessible only by an overgrown track used by loggers and local smugglers. The team, led by Captain Howard Ellison, reached the area on April 2nd. What they found was a reinforced, concrete complex partially embedded in a volcanic outcrop, its surface camouflaged with vegetation. Heavy blast doors, still intact, bore the emblem of the Imperial Japanese Navy Technical Bureau, alongside etched coordinates 44 degrees Nord, 149 degrees WE, pointing to the southern Kuril Islands. The facility's interior showed no signs of combat damage. Corridors were lined with electrical conduits, all still live, powered by geothermal vents tapped through boreholes into the bedrock. The air temperature was unnaturally warm. In the Central Operations Hall, the team discovered over a dozen corpses in full naval uniform, seated at control panels as if frozen mid-shift. The bodies were badly desiccated, suggesting rapid dehydration rather than decay, and lacked obvious trauma. Technical manuals, written in a mix of Japanese and German, were scattered across the consoles. Several bore stamps reading Joint Research Division, Imperial Navy, Reichsluftfahrtministerium, with dates ranging from July 1944 to February 1945. Photographs taken by the team show unfamiliar equipment, large circular arrays resembling radar dishes, but constructed from polished copper segments, all aimed toward the bunker's western wall. Behind the wall was a sealed vault containing steel cylinders and a compact device labeled in both German and Japanese as Phase Synchronizer Mikhail 3. A stenciled warning in German read, Nicht öffnen ohne Genehmigung, Gefahr für Organismus. Do not open without authorization, hazard to organism. On April 4th, Ellison radioed a coded status update to headquarters at Fort Santiago. Target site hot, unknown power system stable, recommend immediate tech transfer, marking for black current. Within 36 hours, additional personnel arrived from Clark Air Base, including civilian technicians from the Office of Naval Research. By April 7th, all sensitive materials had been removed. The following day, the facility was wired with demolition charges. Eyewitness accounts from local fishermen describe a single massive detonation that echoed across the bay. The hillside collapsed inward, sealing the entrance under hundreds of tons of rock. The operation's codename, Black Current, appears only once in surviving Army records, attached to a 4-line entry in an otherwise mundane logistics report. Assets secured. Environment denied. Transit classified. No inventory of the recovered materials has ever been released. All photographs taken by Ellison's team were confiscated, and their negatives remain unaccounted for. Several members of the team were reassigned to Korea within weeks. Others left the service entirely. Japanese post-war archives offer only hints. A 1945 Imperial Navy memorandum, recovered from a burned file in Yokosuka, refers to a Kuril transmission array and an emergency mirror station to be built in the southern archipelago in cooperation with German advisors. The nature of the mirror remains speculative. Some researchers believe it was part of an experimental long-range communication or detection system. Others suspect it was intended for coordinated targeting of high-altitude weapons platforms. The Kuril coordinates etched into the bunker doors remain one of the few concrete clues. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union maintained closed military zones across the islands. In 1965, a Japanese fishing vessel strayed into restricted waters near the specified location and reported unusual atmospheric interference, affecting both compass and radio. Soviet patrol boats detained the crew, who were released weeks later without their equipment. Captain Ellison, in later years, refused all interviews. In a brief 1971 letter to a fellow veteran, he described the Mindoro site only as the place where the war hadn't ended yet. His personal papers, donated posthumously to a university archive, contained nothing related to the operation. Requests to the Department of Defense for information on black currant returned standard boilerplate, no records responsive to your query. What was buried in the volcanic hillside of Mindoro remains a mystery, one in which the final days of the Pacific War intersected with the emerging strategic shadow of the Cold War. The sealed coordinates on the blast doors suggest that the installation was not an isolated project, but part of a wider, perhaps global, network. In the absence of official acknowledgement, the only testimony comes from those brief days in April 1953, when American soldiers walked into a hidden chamber, where the machinery still hummed, the lights still burned, and the dead still sat at their posts. On August 22, 1968, at approximately 02:15 hours, East German border guards stationed near the Marienborn crossing detained a man attempting to cross into the German Democratic Republic from the west. The individual identified himself as Hans Dieter Voigt, a 47-year-old aeronautical engineer formerly employed by Messerschmitt AG until 1945, and later with civilian aerospace firms in Stuttgart. His possession of forged documents and an unusually heavy leather briefcase triggered immediate suspicion. Inside the briefcase, authorities found microfilm canisters containing what appeared to be complete design plans for an aircraft designated Project Schattenflug, Shadow Flight, accompanied by technical notes in both German and English. The designs depicted a swept-wing jet airframe incorporating advanced composite materials layered with what the notes described as mehrschichtige, Absorberhaut, multi-layer absorber skin, apparently intended to scatter and absorb radar emissions. The cover page bore a date of March 6, 1945, and the heading Luftwaffe Technisches Amt, Sonderentwicklung Nummer 24. Initial interrogation transcripts, later leaked to West German counterintelligence, reveal Voigt's claim that the blueprints were recovered from an underground vault near Augsburg in April 1945 by US forces, and subsequently stored at a research facility in Nevada. Voigt alleged that he had been part of a wartime team tasked with developing the absorber skin, and that the technology had been quietly refined during the Cold War for use in reconnaissance aircraft. His stated intention was to deliver the documents to Soviet authorities in exchange for political asylum. Within 48 hours, Voigt was transferred under armed escort to a Soviet military transport bound for Moscow. From that moment, his trail disappears from all accessible East German and Soviet records. The Stasi file on the incident, partially declassified after 1990, contains only a final note dated September 3, 1968. Asset delivered, no further liaison required. 2 years later, in October 1970, a classified NATO reconnaissance satellite pass over the Barents Sea captured blurred imagery of an unidentified aircraft flying at high altitude and speed. The craft's planform matched the Schattenflug schematics, with striking accuracy, a delta wing configuration with recessed engine inlets, and an unusual surface texture visible under certain light conditions. The photographs were filed under unidentified, possible Soviet advanced airframe, and remain officially unacknowledged. Efforts to trace the origins of Project Schattenflug through surviving Luftwaffe archives yield only fragmentary references. A February 1945 memo from the Luftwaffe's RLM Technical Office mentions preliminary absorber layer testing at an undisclosed facility in the Harz Mountains. Allied post-war intelligence surveys of captured German technology make no mention of the project, suggesting it may have been compartmentalized within the SS's advanced weapons program. In 1998, a former Soviet aviation engineer named Sergei Morozov gave an off-record interview to a Western journalist, claiming to have worked on a classified aircraft program in the early 1970s using German-origin skin technology. He described the material as a polymer graphite composite capable of reducing radar cross-section by an order of magnitude. Morozov refused to identify the program or confirm whether it reached operational status, but he did remark that the first drawings came from a man in 1968 from Germany. Voigt's personal history remains a patchwork. Born in Dresden in 1921, he studied mechanical engineering at the Technische Hochschule München before wartime conscription into Messerschmitt's experimental department. Post-war employment records show sporadic contracts with West German aerospace firms, though several gaps in his CV align with suspected intelligence work. His West German citizenship file contains a note, later redacted, linking him to sensitive foreign contact, 1966. No confirmed burial or death certificate for Hans-Dieter Voigt exists. Theories range from voluntary integration into a Soviet design bureau to execution following debriefing. Stasi archival indexes list him as status unverified as late as 1981. What makes the Schattenflug incident particularly notable is the technological leap it implies. While radar-absorbing coatings would not become widely publicized until the late 1970s, the wartime designs Voigt carried appear to prefigure these concepts by more than 3 decades. Whether the Barents Sea aircraft was a Soviet prototype derived from Schattenflug or a Western platform surveilling Soviet waters remains unanswered. In either case, the chain begins with an obscure late-war German file, a man carrying stolen microfilm across a guarded border, and a sudden erasure from all public record. The shadow cast by Schattenflug remains, fittingly, almost invisible. Long after the guns went silent, the hidden war raged on. In closed rooms, in coded files, in the quiet dismantling of what should never have existed. The evidence lies scattered, like shards of a mirror reflecting things we were never meant to see. And somewhere, in that darkness, the unanswered questions still whisper, knowing the most dangerous truths are the ones that refuse to die.